Hey, what is going on, everybody? We are back live at the bench. Be sure to let me know in the comments if the audio is working. From my end, it looks like it's working. Looks like my sound's going out, but I don't know for sure until you tell me. Let me move these screens that I've got up so I can see more appropriately. There we go. That's better. Um, so welcome back to the 10 Scale Adventures bench. It's been a while since I've done a live video. It's been a while since I've done any videos. Just been, adulting, and adulting sucks. But we're here, and I've got a fun build for this live video. It's a project that I started back in August of last year, is when it really started to happen. And it's a first time truck that oh, right on. Thanks. Thanks for letting me know the audio is good. Appreciate it. But what you're going to see in this video is the first time that this truck's really been publicly built. It's a chassis that I designed purely from scratch. I'm calling it the Spartan. You'll see why if you haven't already. It's a C1 SORCCA spec-based chassis. It's comp inspired. I mean, you're going to see it all as we build it. I'll give it just another minute, see if there's anybody else wants to pop in that's maybe a few minutes late, and then we'll kick into it. While I wait for a few more people, go ahead and those who are live or as you're coming in, drop a comment in the comment section. Let us know where you're at, where you're, something like that, or something ridiculous, like you're snowed in. Or in our case here in Oklahoma, we're thawing out from some nice ice over the last couple of days. Typical stuff. I think the video, I am using a new video setup today that I haven't tried before on a live stream. Did some testing with it beforehand. So if I move something the wrong way, that's why I'm not used to the camera orientation that I've got set up here. But I think it's going to work all right. All right. Well, I think we'll go ahead and get on with this because I don't want to sit around and twiddle my thumbs. I'm excited to do this build, and I spent most of the day preparing for it. So what we have here, and this is how it'll, if you were to get one of these, then yes, this is a chassis that I am going to be selling. So it will be available to anybody who wants to purchase it. Obviously, it'll be limited based on how much stock I can get and how quickly I can, turn them around, but they will be available. Basically, what it looks like initially, whoa, man, Glare City, is this is going to be the chassis kit. Two frame rails, rear chassis brace, i.e., there's that Spartan where that comes from. And we've got rear shock towers, forward motor mount plate, front shock towers, a dual servo mount setup, and right here under this piece of tape, which you can't really see if we do this wrong way. Oh, see, there I go, moving it the wrong way. Right here, you can kind of see it in the light that there's a couple more pieces there. One of them is the pan hard mount, and the other is a bearing support plate, which will all make more sense as we get into the build. But this is the chassis kit that we're going to be building today on the live stream. This particular one is not the exact one I'm building because that one I didn't lay out as if it was getting shipped. That chassis is in this box of stuff. And I put together, we're going to go not just build the chassis, but we're going to go we're going to go all the way to a full roller. I don't have the electronics I want to run in it. I do have a mock-up motor to use on this, and the steering servo that's going to go in it, but not all the electronics. When we get towards the end of this and it's assembled, I can grab the prototype truck that I've been running, and I can show you on that one with it fully loaded with all the electronics. So we'll get some of this stuff out of the way. One of the other things I'll note here that I did for this chassis setup, we switch, is this is probably upside down for those of you who are viewing this, isn't it? I need to turn this way. There we go. Is I actually created a set of assembly drawings that show you how to put this chassis together. It's not the only way it can be built, but from the handful of guys that I've had running prototype chassis and having taken it apart and put it together multiple times myself, it's what I found to be probably the easiest way to assemble it for this particular arrangement of parts. Obviously, if you build this with different stuff, you might have to tweak here and there as far as how that works out. But we'll be building off of those drawings basically here in this video. So, cut to the chase. We have the chassis rails. These are laser cut 6061 1/8" thick aluminum. All the aluminum is laser cut 1/8" material. Rear chassis brace, and this is a tab and slot type design with keying for the lock nuts, so it makes the assembly pretty easy. There's no complicated or really hard to get to hardware. There's a better look at the dual servo mount that goes up front. This relief area here is, one, to get rid of excess material because you don't necessarily need the excess weight, and two, it provides some relief for where the slipper, if you use a slipper style top shaft for the FMM, those are a little bit longer than a locker style, and it gives some relief for that without any clearance issues there. Put the servo off to the side for now. I am going to be using AR45 Axial 10.3 straight axles for this build. The prototype that we can take a look at later is on Vanquish F9 VS410 Pro offset axles, and I have another chassis that I have set up on AR44 center diff, and it's a very different way to build this exact same chassis. So we'll take a look at that later on too once we get this one together. And then we got our full set of links that I did up. The links for this chassis are not going to be cookie cutter links that you can just strip from an SCX10 or something like that. You are going to need a custom set of links. However, at this point, if you're looking at building a custom or a comp style aftermarket chassis, you probably already know either how to build links or where to source links. So I'll let you work on that, or if anybody wants to ask questions about how I do it, I'll be happy to explain. This is that forward motor mount plate that I was talking about. I even set up more of a close-up view this time too. This plate right here, when we get to building the forward motor mount, you'll see exactly how all that goes together. And then shock towers with an abundance of mounting locations. These two are the rear shock towers. And when we get to putting those on the chassis, there's also multiple ways to install them on the chassis to improve or to find that ideal shock arrangement. That's your bearing support plate. Whoa, center of the camera right there. That goes with the FMM assembly. You'll see that when we get there. The front shock towers, again, an abundance of mounting positions, and these do only have one position that they can be installed onto the chassis in, but there is an abundance of shock mounting positions to find that ideal geometry for your setup. For this build, we're going to be using DriveTechs, the new short, ultra, or extra short, ultra short, whatever they are, basically the 80 mil DriveTechs. These are currently running, I went with medium springs, not sure that that's going to be exactly the right spring. I mean, you never know until you actually start running a truck and to really tune the shocks. But I started with medium springs and 45 weight oil and a little bit of AE green slime on the O-rings to seal them up. So built those ahead of time. I didn't think anybody wanted to watch me actually build shocks. And those DriveTechs come with a set of O-rings so you can do some preload tuning on them. Again, won't know until you start running it. Wheels and tires we'll just put off to the side for now. And then we have, so this chassis uses a set of 3D printed parts that what I'm actually going to do is I'm not going to sell the 3D printed parts. Again, the chassis will come. This is what will be for sales. This chassis kit, which right here, as you see it on mounted to that cardboard. The 3D printed parts, I'm going to give the files are going to be free. No cost. You can get the files to print your own parts or have your parts printed by Shapeways or by a buddy, whatever the case. It's just, I think it's easier that way. I don't need to, I don't want to try and make money on doing the 3D printed parts. I only have one printer and I use it for my personal stuff and prototyping stuff. So if I make the files free for all the 3D printed parts for this chassis, then you at home can make your own parts or replace your own parts as you need with very minimal cost, cost of filament. And most of us who are building these in this RC scale hobby, we either have or have a buddy that has a 3D printer. So I'm going to make that nice and easy for you. The files will be hosted on the Spartan Chassis Facebook group page. And all the files that I have will be going onto that page. For this chassis, I got to remove some old files from the prototype version because they've changed. But all the files will be going on that page. And once you're on that page, you can get them at no cost to do what you will with. Use them as files to recreate and make your own parts from them. Print them as they are, use them as they are, upload them to Shapeways, get them printed in whatever material you want. That said, if you're not sure, PA12 nylon is a great material to use for it, or their I think that's a multi-jet fusion material. It's good stuff, but that's all to be determined. Oh, wrong camera. Here's some more parts to the FMM. Again, when we build that, those will make more sense. Just a mock-up motor, nothing special there. It's actually a very old DS spec motor, an old Reedy motor from probably over 20 years ago. And it still works, but it's definitely not a crawler motor, and I know that. The motor that I will be putting into this chassis is probably going to be a 13-turn Crawlmaster Pro or Expert, but I wasn't able to get one of those in time, or the ESC. That's the panhard mount. So we'll get to that piece of the assembly when we get there. And then we got drive shafts. And when we get to drive shafts later on, as we're getting towards the end of the build, we can get more into what you're going to need for that. This is, like I said, this is an FMM based design. There is an Axial 3-gear variant, and I do have one set up for you to see if you wanted to use an Axial 3-gear style transmission. But the intended design, what this was designed around, was using the FMM to get a better forward and low weight distribution on the chassis. I did design the FMM setup to specifically support the use of the Team Garage Hacks Creeper T transfer case. In my opinion, is probably the best bang for the buck as far as transfer cases go for any of these scale competitive type trucks. It is just a fabulous piece that is at a great price for what it is. So again, that's going to be your ideal setup. It does require the transfer case to be set up in a mirror from how they ship. At least the two of them that I have both had to be mirrored from how they shipped, which is super easy. You just open the case up, flip some stuff around, bam, it's mirrored. So super easy thing to do. And for the FMM, when we get there, I'll talk more about what's needed to assemble the FMM. No specialty parts there. Parts that are readily available, easy to get a hold of. And these are just some bearings for the FMM. Again, when we get to assembling that, I'll cover what exactly those are. And then the last pieces I have in the box get that out of the way, is sliders. There is a 3D printed slider that is designed specifically to, where's the middle of the camera? There's the middle of the camera. Specifically to support the use of the Toyota Hilux in the RC four-wheel drive two-door Marlin style, Mojave style cab. It's got mounts that directly line up with the pre-existing mounts on the cab. If you wanted to do that, there are other ways. You can come up with however many creative ways to mount the body if you wanted, but there is sliders that directly support mounting to the two-door cab. And the set that I won't be using today, which is this set, is specifically for use with the four-door Mojave style cab. So the chassis works with both. I have done mock-up of both and tested them. So yeah. Now the other thing I'm sure you have noticed is my 3D printed plastic is pink, and the wheels going on this chassis are pink. That is not so much because I am a big fan of pink. It's because this truck is actually going to be my wife's truck. So, and she likes pink, so we're going to do a pink version of hers since the prototype that I've been running was my truck. But all right, there's the basic rundown on the parts that are included with this kit. Let me get some of these shifted out of the way and we'll get started with the build. Actually, I'm going to need those right out of the gate. Move my FMM parts. Try and stay a little bit organized while we do this so I'm not sitting here hunting for parts too much. All right. So step one, and this was something that actually the guys running my prototypes told me about because I was originally being a knucklehead and installing the sliders last, which made them kind of a pain in the neck to install. You had to use one of the little 90-degree Allen wrenches to turn the screw an eighth of a turn at a time. And a couple of the guys pointed out that, hey, you can install the sliders first and it's super easy before anything's put together. So step one in the assembly is to install the sliders. So the hardware needed for installing the sliders is M3 by 10 mil screws. Today I'm going to be building with all stainless hardware. Almost all of my builds recently have gone to stainless hardware. I just like it. I like the way it looks, especially with the raw aluminum. It gives it a real nice look on a black painted chassis. I tend to use black hardware, but for this stuff, we're doing all stainless hardware. All right. So the sliders are side specific. You can see that they're a mirror of one another. And when you put them up next to the chassis, they should run flush to the bottom of the chassis, and the holes that they have to mount to, which you can see they're marked here in the instructions for locations. You can't miss them. Put it that way. You can't. If you attach it in the wrong hole, you won't be able to put the second screw in. So with the one thing that I personally don't do with 3D printed parts is I don't tap the parts. But sometimes if you start to put a screw into the 3D printed parts and it just seems way over tight, you might try running a tap in it just so you don't split the 3D printed part when you get those. It not a big deal if you've got your own 3D printer and you make your own parts as many times as you want, then it's not an issue if you actually crack one or something like that. You just wait an hour and you got a new one. But the hole tolerance that I have set up on the holes with how my printer runs, I've actually found that I don't need to run a tap in them at all. I let the screws basically blind tap as they go in, and then they cut threads, just perfect so that they stay just right. All right, one side. I might have put the wrong length of screws in that other one. Let's double check. Nope, I did use the right length. I just grabbed the wrong length that time. So again, those are M3 by 10 that are used to put the sliders in. If you use these sliders or the Mojave 4-door, if you end up doing a sheet metal type slider, a bent piece of sheet metal, then it could be something very different for putting those in. But per this build, these are M3 by 10. Paul, I'm sorry, I don't know how exactly to pronounce your last name. Thanks for dropping in. Options are good. Oh yeah, I tried to make as many options that made sense with this chassis without compromising things. Checkered Past, how you doing? Thanks for dropping in on the stream. So you know, guys, I'm gonna do my best to follow the comments that come up as they come up. But if it's a little delayed, it's because I was, not paying attention. We'll just cut to the chase. All right. So our sliders are on. Step 1 of the assembly is complete. We'll move on to step 2. I threw that over my shoulder. It went around my head and landed in the toolbox just to be in the way. Try again. All right, step 2. On step 2, we're going to install the dual servo mount front plate, which is this guy here, and we're going to install the rear Spartan chassis brace. I need to shift stuff a little bit more to make sure I have enough room. There we go. That's a little better. All right, so that this looks more appropriate, I'm actually going to flip the chassis around, and then the orientation is similar to that of what you see over here in the drawings. Let's see which way. There we go. That's a little. You can see it a little bit better. Stay up. All right. So like I was saying, these slots, everything on these braces that go in is tab and slot. So you can see it's got tabs there. That handles your initial alignment for where your part goes. And then the hardware, which initially it can be kind of a little tedious to get them in there, but your M5 lock nuts, or M3 lock nuts, key right into these slots. So you don't have to use, a little box wrench or an M5 or a 5 mil driver or 5.5 mil driver to hold those. All you got to do is keep that in that little slot. Let's see, I'm going to go ahead and put the rear, and actually before I even put that one, no, we'll get that one started. Go in there. And the hardware on that is an M3 by 12. And again, I've got hardware callouts are all over the, oh, wrong button. There we go. The hardware callouts. There we go. We're zooming back out. Hardware callouts are all on the sheet. Tells you what length of hardware you need for what locations. And this is for this particular orientation, or not orientation. There's a better word for that. Arrangement, I guess. Configuration. Yeah, I think configuration is probably the best word for that. For this particular configuration, the assembly instructions are accurate. However, again, like I said, that this can be put together different ways to support different components. So again, if you're building a custom chassis and you're using stuff that I'm not using, you might have to figure out a little bit of how that goes together. But again, okay, so I'm holding that nylon lock nut in there, and all I got to do is keep it between that square on the plate, and I just tighten it in. When I'm assembling these, I don't go all the way tight. I just go snug initially until I get all the screws in on one side. that way everything sandwiches together just right with the aluminum bits and it doesn't, tweak it at all. So I do recommend doing that. In this case, the instructions are calling for putting another M12 in M12, M3 by 12 in. But before I do that, what I do want to show you is on the instruction setup, I have the shock tower being installed here. And the reason that it's being installed at these locations is from my prototype setup with basically a Marlin style body. It's a two-door cab with a comp bod bed on it. The shock geometry that I really liked best had the shock hoop mounted up in this location. But this shock tower can also be mounted, if you really needed more forward holes, you can flip it over and mount it in this orientation. Man, I'm doing a terrible job of staying in the middle of the camera. Or you can mount it to these holes either way. Or you can mount it to these two holes either way. The spacing is the same. So you have 1, 2, 3 positions that you can mount this rear shock tower in. And that's going to support multiple wheelbases, multiple shock lengths, basically a very large range of rear geometry can be supported as far as shocks go, depending on what works for your build. Again, I'm going to set this up for how I want it built based on my experience with my prototype version. So the shock hoop's going to end up going in this position. If you're doing a 4-door, I know a couple of the guys that are planning on being in on this stream are planning on doing 4-door builds. It's got a longer wheelbase, and the mock-up version that I did, I actually liked the shock angle with the shock tower mounted at the rear 2 holes. So keep that in mind. And again, okay, so something I am going to point out. You're looking at this and you may notice that, oh man, I'm off the freaking camera again. Shame on me. All right, so you notice the shock hole, you look at the spacing on those holes and you're like, oh wait, there's no way that can reach. That's true. The chassis I am building right now is actually, it's one of 2 that will only ever be one of 2. The actual release version, grab that, which is this one here. Let me grab one that the holes aren't taped up. 1 second. I have another one. I have more. There we go. This is the actual release version that you'll be buying, and you can see the holes on the back of the frame rail are not quite the same. They're a little bit different in spacing, and that's because I fixed this problem with the shock being able to go here, here, or here, specifically to be able to support more wheelbase options. And I discovered that once I had these chassis. And that is the only difference between the actual release chassis rail that is available versus this one of 2 chassis that I'll never sell, because it's got that one really weird oversight when I did the revision from the prototype to a release version. So I was glad that I did a recheck on this before I actually released anything. Paul, what a great idea! Some blueprints. Oh yeah, I figured a lot of people would like that, and since that's the industry that I work in professionally in my adult life. I do drafting and design work for a living, so it was a no-brainer. I know this is something that has been desirable as far as people not knowing that it's something that they want when they're building some of the other competitor chassis out there. And there's a lot of questions about how to put something together, what to use, where, and what order to go in to assemble it to at least get to a roller or slider status. So yeah, that was definitely a key piece I wanted to include with this. Yeah, and so as far as putting the blueprints with the kits, I'm not necessarily going to include paper copies, but there will be a digital version posted with all the STL files for the 3D printed parts. so that you can go and grab a version and just have it on your screen or print your own at home. Again, it's one of those things that I'm doing in an effort to try and keep the price on this whole thing as cheap as I possibly can for it to make sense to do it. And I want it to not break the bank for those who want it too. So doing, having the digital files versus physical is just another way to save everybody a little bit of money and, maybe save a tree or two because I care so much about that. Yep. I know nothing about a ripper. What are you talking about? Checkered past. I don't know what you were talking about as far as a ripper. What is a ripper? Okay. So again, like I said, I'm adding the second screw as seen right here because that's what supports the initial build the way I'm doing it. But I get I put a screw in that's too short. There's definitely a lot of different ways you can do this though, and it'll be one of those ones that you may have to play around with a little bit as you put your build together. But it is an easy chassis to build. So making changes is really easy. Oh, I see my mom has joined us, and I take it you got to somewhere safe to park your RV today, mother. All right. Again, I had grabbed the wrong length of screw. My instructions say M3 by 12, and I brilliantly grabbed an M3 by 10. All right, both of those are in and snugged up. And like I was saying before, there's plenty of room. Your screws, if you use an M3 by 12, they don't bottom out in there. You can get them nice and tight, and that works. It just works really well. I do recommend with nylox, don't reuse them. The M3 nylox, they're cheap enough, whether you buy the stainless or the black oxide, they're cheap enough. The first time a screw goes into the nylon on there, it cuts threads into it that act, a lot like how the threads act on the printed parts the first time you put a screw into those. And it acts kind of, basically like a Loctite. But once you've run a screw in and out of the nylon a couple of times, those threads that get cut into the nylon get a little bit sloppy and then they can come loose. So when you're building this, spend the $5 extra or whatever and buy yourself a 100 pack of M3 nylock nuts so that you have nice fresh ones and don't have to worry about ones coming loose on you. All right. And then as far as doing the other chassis rail, it'll go on like that. But don't do this because once you put those two screws in, then you're going to have to stretch the other end of the chassis to put this plate in. So follow the instructions. They say put both plates in before you move to the other side. And same thing, this front dual servo mount plate. There's no top or bottom. It can be flipped over either way, but it is tab and slot, and it keys into the chassis. It can only go in one way. And this one is retained by one M3 by 12. And that'll make more sense why there's only one later in the build. And and the most tedious part is getting the nut into the key slot, but once you have it there, it's a walk in the park. everything up there squared up. All right. So there's the right-hand rail as it shows here with the plates installed. That means we are done with assembly step 2. All right, assembly step 3. This one is putting on the left-hand rail. Now, something that I think I'm actually going to change because it'll make it easier is before we put this rail on, we're actually going to install the panhard mount. And I want to make a note on here to change that. PH mount first. I'll update the drawings for that. And the reason we're going to do that is the panhard mount goes onto the driver's side frame rail, at least for the setup using AR45s or offset F9s or any axle where the panhard is going to go from, going to go from driver side rail to passenger side axle. Now, if for whatever reason you're running an oddball setup, and I call them oddball because there are a few of them, but not very many, but where the panhard actually goes from the passenger side rail to the driver side axle side, and in which case the panhard mount can be put on the opposite rail. The panhard mount can go to either side of the chassis. But the reason we're going to put that on there now is because it goes in just like this. And by putting it on now, it's a lot easier to hold on to and it won't interfere with anything else later in the build. To double check, the screw length is, make sure the screw length is marked. Oh man, when did I put the panhard mount on? Apparently I didn't add the panhard mount until step 7. So I'll move that up to this spot because it's definitely easier to install here. And again, that's an M3x12. That M3x12 is going to be your most common used length for this chassis assembly. All right. Get that nut lined up. There we go. And then the panhard mount is keyed. You can see there's a vertical square slot right there. That is keyed for the tab on the panhard mount. It just drops in. And then you add the one M3x12. Once it's started, then even though it's loose, the nut is captured, can't go anywhere. You just bring it the rest of the way in. My hand is cramping. There we go. I did kind of thrash through a few things today to make sure that I had everything set up with this to include building the links for it 2 days. So my hands are a little sore from cutting, tapping, and doing a little bit of excessive work. And I had to chip up a bunch of ice this morning to get the wife's car out of the driveway, which was a blast. All right, now that the panhard mount's in, we can actually put these 2 rails together. And I mean, that's as easy as just lining up the tabs and using the same hardware from the other side that we did before, which is M3x12 in 3 places. Oh yeah, good point, Lance. The chassis is also compatible with I believe it's the GMP or GMP, something like that. It's a semi-generic panhard mount that is made by G-Speed, if I'm not mistaken. I had one of the guys with a that's running one of my prototypes request that the chassis support the use of that panhard mount because it gives you a different type of mounting option. So this chassis will work with that, and I will show you what holes that goes into as soon as I get these screws in. So that it stays together. M3 by 12 in the middle slot. Yeah, I think I might have to. I think I'm gonna have to do some practice videos with my cameras to figure out, making sure that I keep my work in the actual view screen. Mickey G-MP, the G-Speed multi-point panhard mount. Yes, that one. Thank you for adding that there in the comments. I appreciate that. This chassis is compatible with those. So the way that works, grab the spare rail, and we'll go to here. So the panhard mount that I have designed specifically for the chassis uses the vertical slot right here and this hole right above the vertical slot for the mounting screw that retains the panhard mount. The GMP panhard mount, if you go that route, will mount to this hole and this hole right here in the chassis. Now, the only thing I will say to keep in mind is there is a chance you may have to do a little bit of clearancing for that to fit right with the front shock tower. And you'll see when the front shock towers go on that the space right there is a little tight, but it is doable. I did leave as much space as made sense to make sure that the front shock tower was structurally sound and still worked with everything else that's going on right here. And I know for a fact that one of the guys on the Spartan page with a prototype is running that panhard mount and hasn't had any issues with it, and he's using those two holes to hold it onto the chassis. But he did have to do a little bit of grinding on it so that it would actually sit flush against the rail. All right, one more screw on this side and we'll be done with step number 3. And if you're curious, there is only 7 steps to build this chassis. Seven steps to build it, and then, well, technically 8. There's a completely separate step for building the FMM assembly. So I guess there's 8 steps. All right, main chassis is together, and that signs off step 3. All right, step 4, we're going to install the skid. Okay, this is a step that I know somebody's going to goof up on and they're going to complain about it. And I don't care, because I'm here to tell you right now that you have to install the lower rear links, or at least the rod ends for the lower rear links, onto the skid plate before you put the skid plate in the chassis. Otherwise, you will have to take it back out, or at least take the rear screw, loosen the front, and take the rear screws out so you can rotate it down in order to put the rear lower links in. They are retained in place by a 20 millimeter grub screw that you can see I have 2 in here. That's what retains the rear lower links. You cannot get to that grub screw with the skid fully mounted into the chassis. I will also note that I made sure, oh wow, the light glare on there, it compensated. This whole note right here on the assembly instructions for this says exactly that. So the assembly instructions tell you to put those in. I'm telling you to put them in. So when you forget to put them in and you have to take your truck back apart to get your rear lower links in, and I mean, it's not that big of a deal to take it out. You take 2 screws out and loosen the other two and rotate the skid, or one way or another, just so you can get to those grub screws. It's not the end of the world, but don't complain about it because you were warned. So those are rear uppers, rear lowers. Okay, so my rear lower links, to keep this from having to chase them around, I'm just going to take the rod ends off of one end of each one of them and install those on the skid, and I'll reconnect the link when we get to that point. Actually, the instructions don't go into doing links and axles and shock install, because that's going to drastically be different based on your wheelbase, your shock selection, your axle selection. So the instructions go through basically building the chassis by itself. It does not get into building suspension. So you'll have to figure that part out on your own. But if you've ever built or worked on any RTR, you have an idea of how to build or assemble a suspension setup. So I'm not worried about it. If you're building a comp-based aftermarket custom chassis, it's custom. That takes some work. Figure it out. If you have questions, you can ask me. Message me on 10 Scale Adventures Facebook page. Or what would be better, and what I will probably say a lot of times, I mean, I won't not give you advice, but if you have questions on a build, or you're stuck, or something just doesn't seem to be working for you, post it up on the Spartan Chassis Facebook group, and you're more likely going to get a faster response. And possibly, if it's a situation that has potentially multiple solutions that could be good, you have a better chance of getting multiple good ideas from the guys on there rather than just one answer from me. And then the information's there for others who may run into those problems in the future. But there you can see I backed the grub screw out, and then I'm just put the rod end in and run the grub screw back in. And so again, these are the 3D printed plastics parts. You don't have to crank these grub screws in super tight. Run them until they bottom out and just put a little bit more on it. You over tighten on 3D printed parts, it doesn't take a whole bunch of extra force to strip the plastic out, or if the plastic doesn't strip, to actually crack the plastic. And once you crack it, well, I mean, you could try gluing it back together, but you're usually better off once you crack it or strip it to just print a new one. Wonder who that was that just made my phone buzz. There we go. All right. So there we go. These two rod ends, which are not shown in the picture on the drawing for the assembly, but the note says to install them. Install these rod ends before you put the skid in the chassis. All right. Skid plate goes in just like that, down into the chassis, and we're going to need 2 M3 by 20. Grab 2 of those. And we're going to need 2 M3 by 12. I can do this in a way where you can see what I'm doing. I can't, because I can't see what I'm doing. If I do it this way. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so the M3 by 12s go at the rear location. Long driver. And again, the alignment for putting these in is just a little bit off of straight. No, can't fit through that. But it's close enough that you can put this in with the skid on. I've never had an issue. I haven't had an issue with it since switching to this method. So I wouldn't sweat it. And then the front screw, that one, all you're going to want to do right now is start this one. You don't need to put it all the way in because you're going to have to swinging things around. You can see right here that the front lower link is going to have to go in, but this screw is easy to get to from the outside of the chassis, so we don't have to worry about having those links in place before we put the skid in. But you can see that there's just no way to get to that grub screw and back that off in order to do the rear lower links. Man, I am doing a terrible job of staying in the frame. I'm sorry, guys. All right, screws on the other side. Again, the M3x12 in the rear. And that's in, and then the M3x20? No, M3x25. These are 25s. Just start that in the front because that to keep the skid all in position properly. And that's it. That step is done. The skid is installed. All right, shock hoops. That's what we're doing next. Again, the instructions call out doing the rears, and then the next sheet, get out of the way. The next sheet calls out doing the fronts. So if you do them the other way around, there's nothing wrong with that. They probably could have all been on a single step, but you know, no reason to overclutter it. Plus, you feel more accomplished when you can throw steps away. All right, so what you do need to know about putting the shock hoops on, depending on position, is if you use the position like I'm going to use here, where the shock hoop has one hole that lines up with a chassis brace plate, that's going to need an M3x16 bolt. And the one that doesn't line up with the chassis plate, you can use an M3x12. So that's the difference. If you take the shock hoop and you put it back here, back one set, the set here, you're going to use an M3x16 here and here instead of M3x12s. And like I said, M3x12 if it's up here, and that get the nylock on the back of it. And that's what we're going to do. If these little getting the nuts lined up in the slots becomes a hassle, a pair of needle nose pliers can help solve that issue. Or if you've got butterfingers or whatever, needle nose pliers work well. Especially once you, oh, that is not the right screw. I grabbed a 25. Get out of here. So, and again, once you get the thread started in them, which doesn't take much, it stays there all on its own, and you just tighten it in. Oh, that one is not keyed. There is my handy dandy 5.5 box wrench. There it is. One of the best tools in the toolbox, the handy Craftsman 5.5 mil box wrench. If you don't have one of those, you probably should get one because they work great. Okay, one side's on. Do the other side. Need a 16, 12, and 2 nylons. Put it in the right way. There we go. Man, I'm definitely gonna have to do some practice work on videos that I'm not gonna post. Keeping my workspace, my work object in my workspace, or adjust my cameras so that they are more appropriate, pointing at the spot that I tend to work in. Thought I had it spaced pretty good, but apparently not, because I keep ending up way away from the middle. Okay. 16's in. 12 is in. Tighten this bad boy up. Go, rear sock hoops are on. Another one bites the... What's the note on this one? Oh, okay. So this sheet does have extra notes added on it as well. Those notes tell you about the shock mounting orientation options, and that where they're shown in the drawing is not the only way they can be installed. It's just I wasn't going to do a whole bunch of different drawings to show all the different potential options for how they can go on. All right, next one is the front shock hoops. Front shock hoops need 2 M3x12s per shock hoop, 1 per shock hoop, and 2 M3 nylocks per shock hoop. And none of these ones key into the front brace at all. So you will need your handy dandy box wrench or something equivalent for tightening down your hardware. There's also one other change on this that needs to be made because I found this error. It's this bolt here needs to go in. Can't quite see that because it's in pencil. Okay, so that bolt right there that I circled, the rear bolt for the front shock hoop, specifically on the driver's side, but I would recommend doing driver and passenger side, but specifically the driver side needs to go in from the inside going out. Here it's shown from the outside going in. It needs to go in from the inside going out, and it needs to be a button head. It cannot be a socket head. And when we get to the FMM, I will show you exactly why that is the case. But that needs to be a button head, and it needs to go from the inside to the outside, and that will be getting fixed on the drawings. It's another one of the updates that I just did not have time to do. So, for that reason, I actually need to pull out the other hardware bin. There they are. Had to find the stainless button heads. Couldn't have black oxide in there. All right. 2 stainless button heads. All right. So we're going to start with those so I don't accidentally put them in the wrong way. That's going to be the first hole behind the front chassis brace, and that's going to go again from the inside going out with the nut on the outside. It is important. If you put it in the wrong way, there's a good chance you'll have an interference problem that will that might be a little frustrating. Not the end of the world. There are fixes for it. There are other ways to solve this problem, but this is the easiest way to not have the problem. Tighten those down. I want my 5.5 driver and a 90-degree Allen wrench. Is this the right size? Nope. There it is. Don't do that. There we go. Tighten these bad boys in. Well, I'll actually just go semi-snug because I still need to get the other bolt in. The other one can go from the outside. Probably not a reason you couldn't put that one on from the inside too, but I presume have them go from the outside in because it's more common for people to have Allen drivers than it is. Well, I don't know. I don't know what's common. I won't even try. Oh, that's a long message. What you got? I would like to see a class 2 or 3 aftermarket comp chassis for the Korean designed G-Made GS02F. This platform has so much potential. It is the best RC of 2020. Okay. I don't have a GS02F, so I have unfortunately can't dispute nor support your statement of it being the best of 2020. However, that does make me interested in looking into it. As far as building an aftermarket class 2, 3 type chassis specifically to support its components, I would have to look into it. It might be worth doing. I am planning on doing a class 2 design Spartan chassis. However, I don't intend on basing it around any RTR type or big box brand type chassis, just because it's a lot of times it can limit you to what your options are as far as using certain components or being stuck with certain components that limit other potential options in a chassis design. But doing an aftermarket chassis rail that can take advantage of an RTR stuff isn't necessarily a bad option. And I know that's how a handful of the other makers out there do it, is they take an RTR and build a chassis around all the RTR components. So, I mean, definitely a plausible thing. I'll definitely have to look into that chassis, though. I'm really not familiar with any of the G-Made stuff. I have never owned a G-Made product. Then again, there's a lot of scale truck stuff that I have never owned. Maybe one day I can fix that. Own one of everything. Wrong side. Grab the right tools. The right tools help. There we go. Universal transplate. There's not really a good way to do a universal transplate. There's too many variations on how stuff mounts. And some of the stuff, like working with these transfer cases from Team Garage Hacks, which are purely aftermarket, are far superior products as far as durability, looks, quality, performance to any of the RTR stuff. So I find it, I don't know that I'll ever design something that will specifically use or be intended to be compatible with a lot of RTR drivetrain components. They're just not the greatest thing out there. The only reason that I did a version of the Spartan that was Axial 3-gear compatible is because the Axial 3-gear transmission is very heavily supported in the aftermarket now, as far as having the bomb proofs from Super Shafty, the Vanquish version, which the chassis I'll show you in a little bit has the Vanquish version of an Axial 3-gear on it, and they're excellent transmissions that are super durable. They're not going to break. Just high quality products. And I don't know that I mean, not everybody wants to spend the kind of money on that. So I don't doubt that you could take actually, I know you could take the stock plastic Axial transmission case and slap it on in place of the VP one that I have on that chassis, and it would work. But I don't want to gear a product that is intended to support a lower quality or a fragile type component, or something that has a potential to have supply problems for getting replacement parts. It really limits how good or how reliable a truck can be. Okay. Front shock towers are on, tightened down. Again, like I was mentioning, the pan heads on the inside specifically, or not pan heads, button heads on the inside of the chassis for the rear mount location of the front shock hoops. That's a key thing to do. It guarantees that you won't have a clearance issue with the spur gear, specifically the driver's side. The reason to do it on the passenger side is to keep the chassis uniform, because I'm a little bit OCD like that. Stuff's got to be symmetrical. But at the same time, the FMM design that I have can be built as a mirror to go in and support either direction of assembly. It's very rare that you'll build it in a mirror from how I'm going to set it up in this truck, because the only axles I know of that have a right side diff on them are either a couple of the RC 4-wheel drive axles, which I don't see anybody ever really building one of these chassis. I didn't want that camera. I wanted that one. I don't see anybody ever really building one of these on RC 4-wheel drive axles, and the only other axles that I'm familiar with that would be worth building on would be a SSD rehoused AR44 setup with a right-hand side offset, which is doable. One of the prototypes got run that way for a little while, and it worked out. Definitely wasn't a bad thing, but it's a much less common option that'll come up for how this chassis will get set up. But again, having that button head turn that way is what's going to keep your spur gear clearance ideal. All right. That means we're done with step 6. Step 6 is gone. Now we're on to step 7. Step 7 is installing the FMM and the pan hard mount. Pan hard mount we already did, because we moved that to like step 3, I think. It's noted on there. I'll fix it. So we need to build the FMM. To build the FMM, we're going to go ahead and switch to this sheet. This sheet breaks down the... I'm going to have to work on the lighting too. The lighting's not great with this new camera positions. This sheet breaks down the FMM assembly and all the parts that go into it. Okay. It looks, at first glance, it looks like it might be complicated, but it's really not, I promise. We're going to go ahead and move the main chassis off to the side, and we'll grab the FMM parts. So we have the motor mount plate, which will go in that orientation. We have the bearing support plate, which is back here. We have the spacer right there. And then we have the frame mounts. One will go on either side. They actually will go that way. And then we have bearings. Now, these are not just normal regular bearings. They are also very easy to source. So don't let this scare you. They're easy to find. I can even provide you a link to pick them up on Amazon because that's where these ones actually came from. These are five. Where are you at, camera? There we go. There we go. These are 5-10-4 flanged bearings. So they've got a little lip on them right there on the outside. You can see that on there. They've got a lip. That lip allows them to be put into the bearing position on the plate and have a hard stop. So the bearing can't go all the way through. So they're 5-10-4 flanged. They are cheap bearings. They are not, it's not an expensive specialty bearing. I'm sure you could find expensive versions that are, got ceramic or high tolerance or mil spec or those sort of things. But it is a readily available. It's again, it's a 5-10-4. What that means is it's a 5 mil ID, a 10 mil OD, not at the flange, but the main OD of the bearings, a 10 mil OD, and then it's a 4 mil wide bearing and it's flanged. 5-10-4 flanged bearing is what it is. Easy to get, readily available. I don't know that you'll be able to pick them up at your local hardware store, but not hard to find online at all. And like I said, they are available off of Amazon. You can get them on Prime. They come in a little baggie, just like this. I think it's a 10 count is what they come. I think is what it comes with. And you only need 2, but having some spares isn't a bad thing because regardless of the bearings do go bad. Okay, so a bearing will go on the front plate. A bearing will go in the bearing support plate at the back. And then we need the shaft. So the original build that I did with this, which this still has some of the mock-up parts on it. The original FMM build that I did, I used an Axial, just a standard Axial slipper clutch setup which was the top shaft off of a standard 3-gear transmission. Readily available, easy to find. But it's got a slipper in it, which for a lot of people, they prefer not to run slippers on their crawlers. So I also went and got my hands on a Vanquish slipper locker setup or slipper eliminator setup, whichever one you want to call it. Finished disassembling the parts that are not part of that. Hey, don't go anywhere. I don't need another bearing. Who's that? All right. So the spur gear I'm going to put on this is a 56 tooth, and that's just because that's the, your basic standard spur gear that's on a lot of your Axial transmissions. And it's a decent place to start with your gearing. It's also probably the largest spur gear that you can run in this setup. You might, and I don't have one and I haven't tried. I've been meaning to get one, but you might be able to clear a 58 with the way this is set up. But I mean, it would be super tight. I don't know that it would clear or not, but a 56 tooth spur works. And the gearing that I run in my prototype version is a 56 tooth spur and an 11 tooth pinion, and it's perfect paired with a Crawlmaster Pro 13 turn motor, and it works flawless. The wheel speed's right on, the low speed's great. It's a perfect setup. So there's not really a need to go to a bigger spur than a 56. If you wanted more clearance, you could always drop down to a 54. And there's going to be some different gear ratio options depending on what your tire size is. Say you set this up as a class 2 chassis. You probably don't want to go to a 54. If you go to a bigger tire, you'll probably want to stay at the 56, but go to a smaller pinion. In 32 pitch, you can go all the way down to a 9-tooth pinion, which the gear ratio should be good enough as long as you pair it with the right motor. But okay, so this is the the Vanquish. So here, this is the Vanquish slipper eliminator. Basically, it comes with, you'll get the top shaft for an Axial 3 gear. You'll get the slipper or the spur gear mount plate that's got a pin through it, and you'll get a pin. And I think it comes with a column sleeve too that I have somewhere else. What you will need to do is you will either need to grind a flat onto this shaft so that you can use a set screw, a grub screw, to lock your output, your intermediate shaft down, or drill out the pinhole to a larger size to use the standard size drive shaft pin. Me personally, I'm doing a ground flat on, I'll end up doing a ground flat on this. Haven't had an issue with that. My prototype truck runs the same way. And as far as I know, most of the guys running the prototype trucks did the same thing on their setups. They did a grind flat, put a grub screw in it with just a pinch of Loctite, and haven't had a single issue with it. So as long as you get it set up, you get it, tightened down and in there good, not going to have a problem with it if you do a grind flat. But you do have the option to drill out the pinhole and use a standard drive shaft pin. The other part that varies here now is this spacer that goes between the motor plate and the FMM plate. There's going to be 3 or 4 different widths of this spacer available, and you're going to want it, depending on what setup you go with for your top shaft, you'll probably want to use a different thickness of spacer to be able to set the drive shaft depth properly to put your intermediate drive shaft in. So because you don't want forward and aft slop in that shaft when you put it together. Otherwise, that'll cause things to fail. It'll break. Or, spin bearings or strip teeth on your spur gear because your spur gear won't stay straight. You don't want movement in that shaft forward and backwards. But there will be multiple thicknesses of the spacer available. And you don't actually even have to use this spacer even. I did this so that there was some easy preset, perfectly aligned holes to match the laser cut plates. But you could go to aluminum spacers, just standoff spacers, and use those instead if you wanted to do that. There's a lot of different options there as how you could set your spacer depth between your motor plate and your bearing plate. The important thing is just making sure that thrust motion forward and back is eliminated. So, all right, let's actually build this FMM so you can see what it looks like assembled. Step 1, we're going to put the spacer in. The screw lengths that are on this sheet are for a thicker spacer than the one that's here. I'm probably going to change that up to support the one that's here because this is the thickness needed to support using the Vanquish top shaft. And let's see. So, and if you have question about, what length of screw do I need to put these together, you can either do a screw that goes all the way through and captures with a nut on the back. That's an easy solution. I don't think I have a stainless one that's an appropriate length. No, the 25 is way too long. And I think the 16s are way too short. They're not way too short, but too short. But the way I'm going to do it and the way it actually shows it on this drawing is a screw coming in from both sides, one from the front, one from the back. So I'm just going to use, I think, an 8 on the front. I think I can do an 8 on the front and the back. I think that'll work with this space. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold this whole little stack together. Oh, I'm already zoomed in. So I'm going to hold the whole little stack together, and I can put the 2 screws with everything pinched together, and they just almost touch, but they're not touching. So I should be able to use 8s front and back. So depending on what spacer you use and how you do that, that'll dictate what hardware you use to assemble this particular stack of parts. Oh, we got some comments going on over there. Oh, wow. That's a whole bunch of stuff going on. There's Neil. Something about coming down. I think he's talking to someone else. Neil, welcome to the party. I missed you showing up. Oh, you asked someone about drifting tomorrow. Oh, yeah. I'm a little jealous. I kind of want to come drift with you guys. I miss it. But this isn't a drifting video, so stop it. I'm kidding. You just realized, Neil, that everything is number matched to the BOM? Really? That is, I'm disappointed in you. You of all people should have seen that right out the gate. Yes, all the balloon numbers on these drawings match the bill of materials that are on the drawings. The number goes to the line item that tells you exactly what that line item is. So that is there to help you determine what is what to put it together. Neil should have seen that right out of the gate because I know what he's going to school for. Yeah. Again, there I am working outside the camera, so you're looking at dead space except for my little face in the top corner. Let's get this started. We'll go in just fine. There we go. Oh man, lots of comments going on. More about drifting. Jake talking about the instructions. Yep, I'm hoping that the instructions do help people out. I did them solely with the intent of trying to make it easier to sort out exactly how to build this stuff. Because some of the aftermarket chassis they're a pain just to even figure out what parts you need to assemble them. I was looking at one of them, and I'm not trying to badmouth any of the other brands that are out there. That's one of the reasons why I'm not mentioning brands or any of that sort of stuff. I'm not badmouthing any of those products. Not saying that they're bad or any means, and I'm not saying that this chassis is better than those. But I was looking at some of them to try and determine what all was needed to assemble them. And I was having a hard time finding the information outside of looking at pictures of complete trucks and saying, okay, that's the part that's needed to put that together, and then tracking down the part, trying to track that part down. And that's something I don't want people to have a hard time figuring out what they need to build the truck. Again, anybody can build it however they want. I could grab the wrong screws, I think. Yeah, I did. Anybody can build this truck however they want. I don't. Once you have it, you can build it your way. Don't care. But if you're looking for something that's going to help you figure out how to build it or what parts you need or what hardware is recommended, having a set of instructions that shows you, how it's intended to go together, what length of screws are needed, and where they go, it really helps. And I've even some of the RTR instructions that I've seen it can be a bit challenging even with those, but and doing up instructions, assembly instructions for anything it's actually it's a much more complicated task than most people give it credit for it. You initially think, okay, I need to give somebody instructions on how to build something, so do A, B, and C, and it's done. But then when you start getting into it, it becomes a lot more complicated than that. Doing the subtext, making sure that everything's accounted for, because you never know who could be building whatever it is you're building or setting up the instructions for. Some people are much more mechanically inclined and better problem solvers than others, and it's just the nature of people. But okay, so there's the spacer. I used 8 mil screws on both sides. On this motor plate side, you're probably going to want to use button heads because that's going to give you better clearance on the backside of your locker or slipper setup. The reason I did not do that on this one and I used these socket heads is these are special socket heads. They're not standard socket heads, and I will show you the difference. And it's because I wanted to do something quick and be special. But if you look at, am I already zoomed in? Yeah. All right. So in this hand, this is a standard socket head. Let's see if I can get that where it's easy to see. There we go. You can see the size of the head on that socket. That's a standard size socket head bolt. The ones I am using are like that one. You can see the head on there. It's a socket style. It's not a button head, but it is half the thickness of a standard socket head. It is actually the same total height as a button head screw, except socket head style. So that's why I'm putting socket heads in there, because I really like the way these low pro socket heads look. But unless you're using low pro socket heads, which most of you probably won't and probably didn't even know that those existed, I recommend button heads for this location because it's going to give you the best clearance on the backside of your slipper eliminator or slipper setup. Holy cow, I'm so far behind in the comments, guys. I have no clue what's going on over there. Paul, thank you. If you're already gone, I appreciate you coming by. If you end up coming in to watch the rest of the video, thanks for dropping in. Oh, how long have I been designing RC? So I've been in my CAD design career field for about 7-8 years now, and I've got some previous experience before that helps support that. As far as designing RC specific, I started playing around with designing stuff for RCs probably 2 to 3 years ago. So not too terribly long in RC, but I have been in the machining type or CAD world for a lot longer. I've gotten to the point where I really enjoy building stuff for RC cars because I am obviously obsessed with RC cars, as you can probably tell by the wall behind me in my videos. All right. So now I put the bearings back in. I took them out while I was putting this assembly together. But so you have the bearing in the back, flange goes to the outside, and bearing in the front with the flange to the outside. So now when these are pinched, the bearings can't go anywhere and they support the main shaft, right? Okay. Now we're going to do the other part that needs to be paid attention to. Hey, come out of there, pin. So this part of it obviously is pretty simple. You put the pin in before you put the part on, right? All right. That's not the part that's important. The part that is important, and I will show you with another bearing, is when you put a bearing onto this shaft, and especially if you're using the Vanquish locker or one of the other lockers of similar design, if you put this bearing in and you put this right here like such, when you tighten this in and you pinch your intermediate shaft on from the other end, right? And you put you want to put just a little bit of pressure on those bearings, just a little bit, that takes the slop out. Well, if you do that like this and you put a bearing right up against this slipper eliminator, then you're actually going to have drag because this slipper eliminator makes contact with the outer flange of the bearing. So it is very important to use a bearing shim. Bearing shims are basically super thin washers that are tolerance thickness. You can get them in different thicknesses. Again, there's packs and stuff. You can find them on Amazon if you just search bearing shims and you're looking for a 5 mil ID bearing shim, and there's a lot of different options. You can see it's, they're pretty small. It's, paper thin, but what that does is when that goes on here, which I'm going to put the nut on that seats this eliminator so I don't have to have it fall apart. When you put that bearing shim in there, it creates that paper thin gap between the slipper eliminator and the bearing surface, the outer flange, because the bearing shim only makes contact with the inner flange of the bearing. That will allow the bearing to spin freely without any drag. So that bearing shim being on there is a crucial, you can kind of see it being reflected, but that bearing shim is a crucial component. And it can be a 0.01, it can be a 0.3, it can be probably, or not a 0.01. That would be really hard to find, but I think they started about 0.05 in thickness up to, around 0.3 is the typical. And you want, it doesn't matter which one of those you use initially, you want a bearing shim in there. Now, if you're setting your shaft depth, you can adjust the depth of the shaft using bearing shims too, so that you get the appropriate amount of shaft coming out the backside for attaching your drive shaft. And then the same goes for the backside. You want to use a bearing shim on that side as well, just to make sure that when you put the intermediate shaft on, that the intermediate shaft, which most of these drive shafts, if it's of any decent quality, have a step on them. That's what that step is for, is so that the drive shaft doesn't make contact with the outer flange of the bearing and create drag. But regardless of whether it has a step or not, I still like to use a bearing shim there, because that makes sure that I'm only getting contact with the inner ring of the bearing so that there's zero chance of having drag on the outer portion. And then I'll put that in just like this, and I'll apply just a little bit of pressure. You can see the end of my thumb, turns a little white, a little bit of pressure, and I'll tighten up the grub screw. And I know I don't have a flat spot on there yet. I'll add a flat spot afterwards. And now it spins nice and free with no forward and backwards movement. This is what you want. Nice and free spinning, no forward backwards movement. Okay, so that's the important part. That's probably the most technical part of this entire build, is those bearing shims, which it is noted on the drawing right here. You can see it calls for a bearing shim as needed. And same with, you can't see it because the camera's zoomed in too far, but same with down here, bearing shim as needed in that stack. So make sure you track that. If you're not getting a free spinning, a no forward backwards movement and free spinning, then you probably need a bearing shim. Okay, that's important. You do that wrong, then you're going to get drag, you're going to get heat, you're going to burn up bearings, or you're going to have forward and back movement, which is going to allow your spur gear to be, this is exaggerated, but when you have forward and backwards movement, your spur gear moves like this and it causes excessive wear. You'll strip spur gears. It's not good. So make sure you have those bearing shims accounted for. All right. Next part, we take these guys. These are the mounts that actually mount the FMM to the chassis. Oh man, there's that ripper again. Someone keeps bringing up a ripper. What is a ripper? Am I good at playing dumb? All right. Nope, I want to go longer. This should call for M3 by 12s. What does it call for? M3 by 12s. Okay. All right. Again, these are going into plastic parts. Super easy. These are, it's a 3D printed part. If you were overly concerned, I have never broken one of these. And as far as I know, none of my prototype guys have actually broken these mounts. But if you were concerned about these mounts breaking, you can get these printed by Shapeways in metal. you could have these metal 3D printed. You would need to tap them, run a tap through them on the holes, but you can get them printed in 3D printed in metal by Shapeways, and it's not terribly expensive. I don't remember what it was, but it's not terribly expensive. So there is that option. I will probably end up getting a set eventually just to test it out and see what they are like and see how good they are. But I have gotten other small bits 3D printed in metal by Shapeways before, and the parts are pretty nice and tough as shit. These frame mounts are side specific. You can't get them to go on the wrong side and have things assemble properly. So if it's not lining up and making sense, you probably have the wrong one on there. The STL files for printing them is labeled left and right. So if you pay attention to what you're printing, when you print them, you'll look at them and go, okay, left and right. The other part that you can look at for clarity on left versus right is they are not an exact mirror. Let me zoom in a little bit. This way. Right here, let me pick this up a little closer. Right here, if you look, this mount is a little bit fat right here on the what goes on the right hand side, and this mount that goes on the left hand side has a thin shoulder on it. Fat shoulder on the right, thin shoulder on the left, and that has to do with how the FMM gets spaced between the frame rails. So you can see I've got a fat shoulder right here, that's the right side, and I've got a thin shoulder right here, that's the left side. Now, if you build this in a mirror, you could mount these, build the FMM in a mirror, and the mounts can go, exactly how they are here, or there will be an option part to print that flips the offset so that your FMM is truly mirrored both in side to side and offset between the rails. That's going to come down to your setup. What works with your setup is going to be what works with your setup. This is what works for most of what's been tested. So that's why it's being done this way. You'll also notice that I put those mounts on without a spur gear in place, because if you put a spur gear on before you put the mounts in, then you can't get to the 2 screws for the left side mount because it's behind the spur gear. So if you're using a slipper setup, then you might want to put those mounts on before you even put the shaft in. Otherwise, the other easy thing to do would be to take that grub screw back off, pull the shaft out, put the 2 screws in, put it back in. But the nice thing with this Vanquish setup is you can put the spur gear on afterwards. Now I just got to figure out which holes line up where. Looks like that one. Yeah. But for this, I'm using, again, stainless hardware, my low profile socket heads with some nifty little aluminum tapered washers. I don't know what the technical name is for them, but they're anodized red, and I thought they had a neat look to them. And since this is pinching down on plastic, it gives a little bit more of a seat on the plastic to make sure that these stay nice and tight and sit flat. Totally unnecessary. If I could find them in pink, I would get them in pink to put on here, but I haven't been able to find them. Oh man, looks like the Ripper talk is ongoing over there. There will be a build video on rebuilding the Ripper sometime in the near future. There's still a few things I want to track down before I do it to make it my own. But for now, I mean, I have had it out once. And at the moment, it is a centerpiece. You know, one of the special ones on the shelf. It's sitting right above my prototype Spartan. All right, there you have it. That's a complete FMM setup right there. Fully assembled, spins nice and free. That's got half of the intermediate shaft on there. Everything that's basically ready to put in the truck. But I'm going to go one step further with that, and I'm going to put the mock-up motor in, because one of the things I really like about how I set this up is the you can set your gear mesh with the entire FMM assembly out of the truck, and it's so much easier to get the mesh just right when you're only dealing with this many pieces. And again, I'm using my fancy little red aluminum washers for setting the motor. I may have to have some made in pink if I can't find any, just so that they match the truck better. And the sad part is I only go to the extent of doing all this really nice stuff on trucks that are for my wife. My shipbox, most of my shipbox rigs are hodgepodge of shit and spacers and using pivot balls for spacers. And then I go and I do a build like this that's not even going to be for me to drive, and I get, special hardware, all that kind of stuff. I think part of that secretly because I know that this truck will spend most of its life as a shelf queen and always look good when I need one to show off. That's probably the real reason. All right, the motor is in, and right now this has got a 13-tooth pinion, 56-tooth spur, 13-tooth pinion. There we go, some light. 56 spur, 13-tooth pinion, right? And you can see I've got plenty of room. I can go to a bigger pinion if I wanted to go to a bigger pinion. And the lighting is terrible here. What am I doing? Trying to find some light. There we go. You can see I can go to probably up to, I don't know, a 15 or 17 tooth pinion. And I can go a lot smaller, which that's more what I was worried about, is being able to go smaller, because you can always pick up more wheel speed by going smaller on the spur gear. But getting more low end speed needs a smaller pinion and a bigger spur. And for a lot of us doing these scale crawler trucks, keeping the low end where it's ideally and good controlled is what's most important. But this setup is, this is basically the starting point for most of your setups, depending on what you're going to do. Starting with the 5613 is a pretty standard starting point for the setup that's here. But yeah, so I mean, it was that easy. Tweak the motor around. I can feel the gear mesh. Just a little bit of slop in there. 32 pitch has a little bit more slop than 48. Sometimes I like to run 48 on stuff. It changes gear options, but I can just go through and make sure it feels good all the way around. Easy to check, easy to adjust. And now that is ready to drop into the truck. Before I drop that in though, which when I actually go to bolt this in, we'll literally just slide it between the frame rails. And then we'll let it fall out just like that. That's exactly what I intended to do. Slide it in the rails. And then it'll get 2 screws on this side, 2 on the other side, and the FMM's installed. But we're not actually going to bolt that in yet. Now we're going to put the links and axles on, and we'll put the T-case in, and then we'll really be getting somewhere. We may forego the messing with the servo tonight, just because we'll see how long the video goes. We've already been burning for an hour and 45 minutes. Not sure how long people want to watch, but I'll keep going if there's people still watching. So we're starting, I'm putting the rear links back together that we separated to install the rod ends. These are the rear lower links. Normal 540, 550 compatible. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by normal. This motor here is a standard sized 540 brushed rebuildable can. I I haven't personally tried putting a sealed can in here. I think it'll fit a sealed can at a 540 length. I don't know about 550 length. 550 length might create issues with the intermediate shaft. I don't own any 550 length motors. I have never had a reason to use a 550 motor. They're big and they're bulky. And there's plenty of great 540 can motors out there that don't cost that much. I mean, the Home Hobby Polar Pro 13 turn rebuildable can, which is exactly the same size as this one, is $50. I think it's $50, $55. Or you can go, the Reedy 16.5 rebuildable crawler 5-slot motor, which actually I have one now, and it's a great motor. I wouldn't say it's quite on par with the Holmes motor, but it's a great smooth motor, and it's 30 or $35, which is not that much more than your sealed cans, and they're rebuildable, and they're just nicer motors. So I don't ever mess around with sealed cans. I don't know how well they'll fit or not. All right, rear uppers are in, or rear lowers are in. And I'm going to go ahead and attach those to the axle because I don't remember which holes on the chassis I set the upper links for because I took them off a week ago or more. And there's 5 different mounting positions for the rear uppers. But once I have the axle in place, they should, based on pinion angle, I'll know which hole that those are supposed to be in. A max pinion and spur size. I don't know what the absolute max combo is. 56 is probably the max spur. A 32 pitch 56 tooth spur is probably as big as you can get in there. You might, and I say might because I haven't tried it, you might be able to get a 58, but you're definitely not going bigger than that. Not going to get a 60 in there. As far as pinion, I know it'll go down to a 10 or a 9 or a 10 as far as the small side when paired with a 56, because I've had both of those on my prototype truck that's got the same FMM setup in it. And it'll probably go up to a 17 or an 18 on a 56 tooth spur. Or if you drop to a 54, then you can go even bigger with the pinion. There's a pretty good range. It's not a huge range, but there's a pretty good range of pinion sizes or pinion spur combos that it'll support. And if you're looking for more ratios than that, you can always look at 48 pitch gearing, and 48 pitch gearing really starts to give you more ratios to mess around with, just because you have more teeth to match up the sizes with. All right. One of the things I absolutely love that Axial did with the 10.3 axles is they didn't make it so that the tabs that the links go into are threaded on both sides. That one side is just a through hole, so that you don't have to thread the screw for 3 hours to get it all the way in. Just so you all know, you weren't sure. Oh, what else we got going on over there? You must be. I take it you're Mickey. You're talking about the wife and her Bronco in that comment. That truck. Oh my! God, it is probably one of the most neglected trucks in the entire fleet that has seen the least amount of changes since it first got done 2.5 years, 3 years ago. And the truck is ridiculous. I mean, it is by no means is it a true comp crawler truck, but some of the things that it does is obnoxious. And the stupid, basically, it can't brake. I mean, she plows the crap out of that truck, and it just keeps taking a licking and keeps on kicking. All right, rear upper links. One thing I will do is I will put a list of the link lengths that I have tested with, what axles I did them with. In the case, I've got a full set of link lengths figured out for what I think is good link lengths for the AR45s, for instance. I will provide all that information. That again, that is suggested information. I am by no means telling you that it's what it needs to be, what it has to be, or that it can't be something different. I mean, just the upper links alone in the rear, there's 5 different positions you can mount the links to on the chassis, depending on how you want your pinion angle or your anti-squat. There's definitely a lot of options there for customizing it, but I will provide a list of what I used as something you might be able to use as a starting point, but by no means take that as in the only setup of what it has to be. I highly recommend doing some playing around yourself to figure out what you like based on whatever your setup is. All right. I don't want to drive that one. Courtesy of Mr. Lance, who's in here watching, I have the tool to make this easy. There we go. All right. That flips down. And we flip over. So again, I had previously set this up and figured out all my link lengths, and now I just got to figure out which hole they were set up for as an appropriate pinion angle. Because like a dip that I am, I did not actually mark it. I'm going to say it's that hole. We'll adjust it later if need be. All right. I believe 16s are appropriate. Yep. 16 mil screws are good for the links. Assuming you've got a 7 to 7.5 mil rod end. If you've got something else in there or you run a spacer, it's going to take something different. Wrong tool. Spin that around, another bolt. All right. I was watching. Has anybody been keeping track of the Road to National series that's going on right now that Harley Designs is doing? Well, he's doing it with Matt from Scale Builders Guild, but his C1 build that he's doing right now, oh man, that is an awesome truck. It is making me envious and inspiring me to want to try out a few things. Super cool build. The compressed carbon fiber mold setup that he's doing is pretty trick. Okay, so as you can see, let's see if I can show it to you well. You can kind of see the pinion angles pointed down a little bit. I think I picked the wrong holes. I think I wanted it pointed up a little bit, so though I'm going to move the links up one hole in the line just because I'm not one for down pointed pinion. However, that can help with anti-squat. I think it's anti-squat that helps. He is taking it super serious, but come on, if you started down that road to build a rig like that, I mean, there is no one else out there who's got something comparable. That is such a cool build. The level of detail is badass. I mean, it doesn't, it definitely helps that he's got the full, access to the full VS410 CAD files. I mean, that definitely helps as far as designing stuff to use with that chassis, which maybe someday I do something like that with the Spartan chassis. But even still, I mean, there's some trick stuff. The custom vacuum form parts, the compressed carbon parts, and the cage work on it's pretty fantastic too. And you're doing it with titanium, which I appreciate. However, I don't know that I would ever go to that extent of actually using titanium, just because I find it to be overkill. But it also is super cool. So, cool factor is something for sure. All right, let's see. Yeah, there we go. That fixed the pinion angle. Now it's a little bit of an up angle. And you can see the rear link bars with this setup. I think this is what I was originally thinking, is the rear link bars are almost parallel from the side when the axle is parallel with the chassis. But, obviously not parallel from the top. Yep. All right. Let's put some shocks on. Get the drive techs out. First time ever even taking these 80 mils out since I built these and put them right in the bag, right back in the bag. So these have never actually been used or on the chassis for mock-up at all. So we'll have to play this one by ear. Captain Craft Foam for interior last year. that was actually pretty entertaining. However, yeah. One thing I did get for installing the shocks is some nice little aluminum spacers that are 3mm ID, because I knew that at minimum you'll need a spacer off the shock tower. It'll probably need one down at the axle too, because you can't, I mean, the shock body can't be touching the shock tower once it's assembled. That just doesn't work. Oh man, the odds are I don't have the right length of screws for that. I think the 16 is too short and the 25 is too long. I don't think the 16's got enough thread length. Oh, it does. It's got enough thread length. Ooh. These 80s are super short. I dig it. All right, that one's on. Snug it up a little bit. Put the lower on. Actually, that's good. I think that's going to be too short. I need to go to the lower hole. So like I said, I have not mocked the chassis up using 80 mil shocks, and definitely not the 80 mil drive techs. So we may have to fiddle with this a little. I may have to fiddle with the shock geometry a little bit after the video, but we're going to go with this position for the sake of the video. I'm not going to sit here and make you watch me move the shock for an hour. And I'm almost certain we need a spacer at the bottom. How much? Not just a small one. Okay. Um, so Paul's saying Matt's got a very nice so-called J6 or whatever. It really would be called, but definitely a sweet ride. Yeah, he's Matt's class one. It's on par with the type of build that I would expect from him from watching a lot of his videos. He's very good at the scale build, and I can't wait to see him get into doing all the paint and detail work on that build. It's going to look fantastic without a doubt. Um, his print work looks great. The body work's going to take forever. Not envious of that, but yeah, that's definitely gonna be another really nice build. It'll be interesting to see the finished product between Matt and Josh as far as which one actually comes out to be the fancier, nicer truck, and which one has better performance. Because Josh built on a VS 410 Pro, no, Phoenix chassis with a Pro Trans, if I remember right. And oh, that's not the hole I wanted that in. And then Matt built on the Brazen Scale C1 Pro chassis, which looks like a pretty nice chassis. I've looked at that one too, and it looks like a pretty nice setup. So I'm almost thinking that given equal driver performance input, I think Matt's chassis might have an edge over Joss's chassis, but TBD. Who am I to say? Plus, driver makes all the difference, and whether or not you're having a good day. I mean, I might be pretty good at designing and building these, but by no means am I the best driver out there. I've seen guys drive, do some crazy stuff with RTRs that you wouldn't even think possible, and then you got those guys who've got really nice high dollar performance builds and they can't drive worth a snot. So who knows? Oh man, I think the medium springs are. Ooh, I'm not sure. I can't live with them in this position. It doesn't work. I almost think that these might be too short, which I hate to say that. Oh man, don't tell me that the 80s are going to be too short. I might have to do some flipping and swapping. I think they'll work well on the front, but I think the 80s might not be a good choice for the back. I think that they might be too short. And the more I rake it, I don't know. It's still tough to say. I know. Too early to assume. Which that's going to need a longer screw if I do that. I guess I should have done a mock-up on this with these shocks beforehand so I would know where to put them. Mickey, the driving it's one of those things where it takes practice with the same setup without making changes to it. Because the more you drive the same setup without making changes, then you get familiar with how it works and what it can and can't do. That was something that took me a little while to learn, was to stop making changes to thinking that a change was going to make the truck better, when really it was just stop screwing around with the truck and learn to drive it. My biggest problem now is I just don't get out and drive enough. I haven't I mean, well, I just don't get out to drive enough to get enough wheel time to actually get good. I'm not terrible, but I'm not good, quote unquote good. All right. Hopefully I have enough of these spacers when I get to the front. Otherwise I'll have to go to some the janky spacer bin and they won't match. What do we say? Going here. Hey. Oh, there we go. I like that position. Let me snug those up. I think that might work. That might work just right. So I ended up having to put 2 spacers at the shock tower side. They're 3 mil thick aluminum spacers, so I've got 6 mils of spacer at the side of the shock tower because the angle that the shocks are at goes right over the top of one of the brace bolts. But you can actually see that they're still, when you look at it, in line with the chassis. Let's see if I move this the right way. The shock is still more or less vertical as far as the parallel is. It's not at a weird angle outward. And fully compressed, I've got, looks like 3 to 4 millimeters above the top of the links before they touch anything. So there's a little bit of room. Might be able to go forward one more position, but we're going to go with that for now. That's a much happier position as far as I'm concerned. Before, the axle was stopping like a ½ inch shy, which I know is way, way too high of a position for it to sit in. Now let's throw the front end on. And I'm definitely thinking we're going to skip messing with the steering servo at all tonight. That'll take us way late. I can show you how it sits in there. We just won't fiddle around with actually getting everything aligned with that. These are the front lowers. So we'll go ahead and attach these. And one thing I did do on these when I took it apart from mock-up, just an idea for those who might do a build, is the screws that I used in here for the mock-up also mounted the lower shocks to where the link mount is rather than the raised boss for the shock that was provided. And that had to do with getting the geometry that I was happy with before. But if you ever blow a truck apart and you put the hardware back in where it came out, that can help remind you of why you did something the way you did, because you'll look at it and go, oh yeah, that's right, I need to mount the shock here, not there, kind of thing. Especially if you blow it apart and it's apart for a while before you put it back together. All right, those were the lowers. Where's the front upper? Front upper. And labeling your links when you take them off with a little bit of masking tape and letters like FU can be helpful for keeping them sorted out. Oh, that needs to go out a little bit more. Come on, get in there. There we go. Find out. Power tool to rescue. Buzz this guy in. All right. I think because I went to shorter shocks, notably shorter shocks I am going to try mounting them on the shock mounting boss rather than in the link position. Uh, so we're just going to put the links in, which means I need a much shorter screw for that. Black oxide screws. Oh. I think it's a 16. Yeah, 16 mil button head. That's what we're going to put in those. Take out that long one, put it off to the side in case we need it, and put in a short one. So Jake asked if I typically build the back before I build the front. Because he does it the opposite way typically. When I'm first setting a truck up for the very first time and trying to figure out what the links are going to be like, I start in the front, because that's going to set figuring out the panhard and the steering, and getting all that stuff lined up properly with the axle movement vertically, is gonna that's a pretty fixed position. You can't do a whole lot to change that geometry, because I can't take the panhard and move it 4 millimeters forward, or 10 millimeters backwards. Not very easily, anyways. You could do stuff with spacers and stuff, but your front axle typically has an ideal position how it fits with all your servo and panhard and everything. So when I'm setting it up a truck the first time, I will start in the front and figure out where the front axle wants to be at, and then I will position my rear axle accordingly. In this case, the only reason I started in the back is because I already had all the link work figured out, from previously setting the truck up. So, but in an initial setup, I would start in the front. Back those out a little bit. Ooh, don't knock the screws over. Go. That one's going. Other side started. Yeah, I figured, Jake, that you would do the same thing, and I mean, it's really the only logical way to start a new custom build that you don't already know what your links are going to be, is to set your wheelbase off of where your front axle is happy. Because once the rear axle is super easy to change your wheelbase on, um, unless it's a leaf spring rig. Leaf spring rigs, that's a whole different pain in the neck to get the wheelbase dialed in. But as far as these linked trucks with 4-link rear, if the front axle is happy, and then you need to set your wheelbase and you need to adjust link lengths, adjusting the rear 4-link is way easier than trying to move around the front link geometry. Jake, your message was retracted. Do you not agree? Or did you misspell something? That's the first time I've ever seen a retracted message. Yeah. Yeah, basically. Yeah. The rear can go wherever it needs to go, and it's easy to adjust the length on the rear end, on the rear geometry. It's a pain to move the front geometry. All right. So the front links are in. Oh, I still need to, well, the front lowers are in. I just need to tighten up this side here. Now we're starting to look like we're getting somewhere. And it's going to, the rest of this is actually going to come together pretty quick. Let's, all right. And probably if I look at this straight from the top. Yep, that was definitely set in that. I should have made notes as to which mounting holes I used for the links. In the future, I will make notes on that so that I don't have to refigure out the geometry. At least the links were exactly what I needed them to be. And I'm using a 16 mil screw M3 with the nylock on the backside for single shear on the upper link. With this 1/8 inch thick material, doing that results in basically, you can see right here at the end of my fingernail. I don't know how clear that is, but you can see you get about 1 to 2 millimeters. You can see it back here on the rears too. You get about 1 to 2 millimeters of thread all the way out, or thread out the backside of the nylock. That's ideal length for making sure that that nylock is fully engaged by the screw that gets put on there. So 16 mil screws with 7.5 mil pivot balls. That's what you get, and that's a pretty good setup right there as far as screw depth. All right, pan hard. Panhard still has a screw in it, so that must be what was needed, but it is a black oxide, so I won't be using that. A black oxide with non-nylock, definitely mock-up hardware. Almost there. Hey, Lance, if you, never mind. I was going to ask you if you've run on those new axles you've got, but I don't know whether you have or not, but it doesn't really matter because you're going to tear apart to rebuild on a release. So that doesn't matter. Power tools. Nope. Now it's attached there. So with the SCX 10.3 axles, the panhard on the chassis will want to be mounted to the back of the panhard mount. So depending on what your axle is and how your panhard, need to switch cameras. There we go. Depending on which axle you have and how your panhard mount goes, you're using the panhard mount provided with a 10.3. See right there, the panhard will go behind that. If you have your axle set up different, they can also get mounted to. It can also get mounted to the front. But with the 10.3 axle, if you use the links that I provide, you'll want to go behind that, and it'll make your panhard basically perfectly in line with the axle right over the top of the truss, and there's enough clearance there for a standard, just straight panhard link over the top of the axle. We'll go ahead and throw a 16 M3 by 16 screw on that. Put an M nylock on the back side. It is a single shear panhard mount. Shouldn't be any issue strength wise. I think most of the pan hard mounts are single shear. Not all, but most. And I don't foresee the aluminum getting broken or ripped out of the chassis. Loose hardware might be the only thing that you have an occasional deal, but that's typical for everything. Okay, now we need to install the shocks. Install the front shocks. Oh, you're just the run the prototype at Northwest to try out the new axle housings. Don't do it, man. If they're still scratch free, don't do it. Wait until you get it on the new chassis. That way you have, a nice full blingy setup on the new chassis before the scratches go on. I need 2 more screws of appropriate length for attaching the front shocks. And it looks like I have 5 spacers left. How do I have an odd number of spacers? 1, 2. Interesting. I used 6 on the back. Hopefully I don't need 6 on the front. I only have 5. Start with 4. All right. The top will definitely need a minimum of 1. Right there. What's full compression? Oh, further back. Oh, of course. Oh no, that's annoying. So the angle that my shock wants to be at, I think, is going to need more spacer than I have currently because that bolt that's flipped around to clear the spur, and with where these shocks land. All right, let's see if 2 spacers is enough to fix that. I really should have mocked up with these shocks. Really should have. No, 2 spacers does not fix that. Oh, it'll be good right there. Okay. 6 mil spacers at the top. Or in this case, I have 2 3 mil with 80 mil shocks. The button head going from the inside to the outside, depending on your shock position, might present some challenges and might need a little bit of finagling as far as what spacers are needed on your shock to appropriately clear that button head. But nothing that can't be overcome. Just I'm just short a matching, what would be a matching spacer. Looks like I need, we'll go to the junk bin for spacers. What do we got? How about a couple of little red spacers? See if those will do the trick. Oh, black spacers, perfect. Then they won't even be noticeable. 1, and come on. 2 black spacers. Those should do the trick. And what did I do with the screw? I lost it. Oh, I didn't have it because it was in a different spot before. It went off the link mount, and I changed those out. Those are countersunk. Okay, let's see if a 16 mil will do the trick. Nope, it needs to be longer. 20 mil. We need to go to the socket heads. All right. One. Perfect. All right. Next time I'll mock up with the shocks I'm actually going to use, guys. I do apologize. I should have known about this minor adjustment in what my geometry was, or known that it was going to need a minor adjustment ahead of time by using different shocks. But when the mock-up work was done, I did not have the 80 mil shocks. That'll work. It will work for now. Might need a little bit of tweaking, but that's okay. Top gets 2 spacers. Middle hole. Spin it in. And then the bottom. I think the medium springs are also going to be too stiff. I might have to swap these out for a lighter spring. This is a pretty stiff setup at the moment. But I mean, that's also going to flux a little bit once there's a full complement of electronics, a battery, and a body on here. So, okay. So with the front fully compressed, let's see, with the front fully compressed, you can see there's definitely no clearance issue with the panhard to the top of the axle or with the chassis. And there's actually still a lot of room over the axle. I could probably move the shocks back one hole, but then I end up with the interference issue on that nut, and I don't think I have an appropriate spacer to fix that offhand. I don't think I do. At least not, I don't have one that matches. That's the annoying part. The spacer options I have don't match. But we'll go ahead and throw another 2 mils of spacer in there, and that should get it around that nut where the panhard, or where the shock tower bolt's coming out. And then once it's to the outside of that, then we can go back a little bit further, and that front end should tuck up a little bit better. And I'm going to use the red spacers. Gonna do it. They'll just stand out like a sore thumb. Need replacing. So putting that puts it at it's an 8 mil spacer off the shock tower to the DriveTech shock anyway. Different shocks might need something a little bit different depending on what their outer diameter is. But that clears, not by a lot, but it clears. And it actually makes the shock almost vertical, which I do like that. So it might even be an improvement to be at 8-9 mils in space off the shock tower with an AR-45 axle. Because then you get that the shock, acting vertically and not inboard on the chassis. That should actually make shock performance better. Nuts. And we're going to go back one more hole real quick. That's almost there, but not quite. I'll probably have to swap those screws out that are holding the shocks in. They're not quite getting into the nylon, but I won't go digging for a 2 mil longer screw right now. They're long enough that they'll get us through the build. There we go. Perfect. Okay, now the front end is exactly where I'd like it. So at full compression, the panhard bar and on the chassis side has about 1 to 2 mils of clearance on the bottom of the frame rail. On the, let me turn this the right way. On the axle side, it's, man, which way do I need to move? Right there. I need to see there. So you can see right there on the axle side, it full bump the panhard just barely gets to where it's, at the touch of the axle, but that is 100% bump. The shocks are fully compressed. So your panhard clears, your steering clears lock to lock on the chassis. Now, if you look at it on this side, man, I need better. I gotta fix the lighting. I'm sorry, you guys. The lighting is crap. Move this out of the way. That's probably not helping anything. All right, so you can see this tall screw that's sticking up right here. That's where your steering link is going to go, and you can see it full bump looking at the angle of the chassis. There's enough room at full bump for a link to pass under the frame rail and still get out to the steering, so you should be clear on that. But yeah, that allows everything to tuck up. Basically, damn near perfect, and it's using all straight links, no curve, having to use fancy curve links for the panhard. A straight link is going to work just fine for the steering, which I actually have the link for the steering right here if I do end up putting that on tonight. But we're going to go ahead and get the drivetrain in so you can see the FMM installed, because that's what we really need to get to. FMM assembly's done. Last step on the instructions. All right. The instructions don't cover installing a creeper T because I didn't create the creeper T, but we're going to go ahead and put that in too. So we'll put that in before we put the FMN in. That's going to take some countersink screws, and off the top of my head, I don't exactly remember what length is needed. Should be the length that I bought though. That's probably why I bought them. And yeah, that looks like it's going to be just fine. And I believe these are 8 mil. 8 mil countersunk is what goes into the bottom of the skid plate for installing a creeper T, and nope, maybe I didn't buy the right ones. Actually, I have a full kit, so maybe that's not why I bought that. Maybe I just needed more of that size. There you go. I think it actually takes two sizes. I think it's 2 6s and the spots on the Creeper T where the holes don't go all the way through, and 8s where the holes do go all the way through. I think that's what's needed to install the Creeper T. So let's verify that. So if you look on the Creeper T transfer case, the hole here goes all the way through. The hole on the opposite side does not go all the way through. And then the hole here goes all the way through, but the hole on this side at that point doesn't. So the ones that don't go all the way through are going to need shorter screws so that they don't bottom out in those holes. Why they don't necessarily go all the way through, I do not know. That in a couple of spots, it looks like there's enough material space without interfering with internals for the screws to go all the way through the bosses. But that's not how they did it, so that's fine. I still think it's one of the best transfer cases on the market. VYNFYI, I'm not sure I understand your comment, but I appreciate you dropping in on the video. And I can't pronounce that name either. I apologize. It's a language I'm not familiar with. Yeah, so it's 6 mil screws in most definitely it's 6 mil screws in the holes that are capped on the Creeper T, and 8 mils in the other two holes, the through holes. We end up with 4 screws in the bottom, just like that. And you can see in the light right there that the screw on that one, the 8 mil screw, does poke all the way through just a little bit. I did that to make sure that you get good thread engagement. Same goes for the screw that's right there on the back side that pokes all the way through. And then you have the 2 capped screws that, well, obviously you can't see them because those are capped holes. All right, now fun part. Let's put the FMM into the chassis. And that's a nice, easy install. And you're going to use, of all things, 2 M3x12s per side. Drops in just like that. Oh, it moved. Come on, screw. Thank you. Oh, there's one started. And there's number 2 is started. Buzz those on in. Now I'm not going to tighten these all the way in until I get the 2 screws on the other side started, just to make sure that the alignment is good on the other side before I crank anything tight. There. Oh, bouncing out. Oh, thanks for checking in, for dropping in and hanging out and watching the video. I appreciate it. Have a good evening. Yeah, let me when you're ready to get one. You let me know. I've got them in stock. I have a handful of them ready to go. To include that one that I showed at the beginning of the video, that's actually already mounted up in its shipping orientate configuration. So yeah, just hit me up on Facebook and we can make it happen. Almost there. The FMM is 1, 2, 3, and 4 screws. The FMM is now mounted. Now we can take the intermediate shaft. Let me take the pin out. Go. And then we'll line up the phasing on the intermediate shaft. Now the intermediate shaft for this chassis is up. I have another one that I can measure. Go. There it is with the intermediate shaft in it. What do I do with the other one? There it is. Open this up and I will give you a measurement right here, right now. And I will also make sure that that information, what I used, is available. Probably the best quality intermediate shaft that you can get is the intermediate shaft is to get it through Super Shafty and use their intermediate shaft, and you can order it. They've got a couple of really short lengths, on the newer style Hero shafts, and they're fantastic. That's what I have in my prototype. This particular shaft that I have in my hand is an Amazon special. I know that is disappointing, and I am disappointed, but the Hero shafts have been out of stock for a while, and that's what I want. So in the meantime, I found another option that is a good placeholder until those Hero shafts come back in stock. This one, which I can, if you're interested, I can provide a link. I have no clue how durable they are. I have not actually run one of these shafts. I have only used them in assembly so far, but I can provide the link to that if you're interested. Because they're cheap, buy two so you have a spare. So the short length on this shaft is a 62 millimeter, and the extended length that is appropriate. So you can see it's got a real small stub on it. Am I zoomed in? Yeah. So it's got a real small stub. That the spline stub, you want probably 75 to 100% of that spline still engaged so that you don't get drive shaft wobble out of that joint. So I would say the usable extended length on this is probably right around 70 millimeters, 70, 72. And that's basically what's in here. I don't know how much you can see it. There is a little bit of drive shaft wobble at the length that it's extended at. But I think that would be okay. I don't think that that's an excessive amount of wobble at that point. But TBD, like I said, I haven't actually run one of these shafts. But you probably want something that's in the range of 62, 64 mil length to like a 70, 72 mil length is going to be what that intermediate shaft is probably ideal at. Oh, Kenneth Mercer. Welcome. Either you just decided to show up or you've been awfully quiet. And I'm going to guess that you just showed up because it's not like you to be awfully quiet. You ready to add one of these trucks to your fleet there, man? Okay, so intermediate shaft is in. The rear drive shaft, which is the drive shafts I would recommend, the Incision SCX-10-2, at least for the Hilux two-door cab Mojave Marlin wheelbase, that wheelbase, the SCX-10-2 Incision drive shaft set, which comes with this drive shaft and one that is just a little bit shorter than this one, is a perfect drive shaft set for this chassis. However, I don't have the front drive shaft to go with the rear drive shaft because it's in another truck. And I didn't feel like taking it out for this build, and they didn't have any in stock when I went to buy another set. So pairing for the front drive shaft, I have this hunk of shit. Yes, I know, another used crap part going on this build that will have to be replaced. I know. But it is what it is. Don't hate me. Don't hate me. It's not your truck. But the SX-10-2 is definitely the right set of shafts for putting into this. So we'll start by putting the rear half on the axle. I tend to favor putting the outer sleeve section of the drive shaft down at the axle end. That way, I don't know. That's just what I favor doing. I don't really have a good reason for it. So some others do it other ways. I don't know. I can't explain it. This drive shaft, this other mock-up position drive shaft I'm using is a junky enough drive shaft that it doesn't even have the option for an actual through pin. You can only use a grub screw on it. Junky, right? I know. Shame on me. Shame on me. I couldn't get the parts in time. And just is what it is. And then we'll go ahead and get the phasing lined up. Yep, that's that. Pin. There we go. You're down to one rig there, Kenneth. What happened to the hard body four door? I mean, I know you wasted a fender on it, but did you get rid of the whole truck? I know you didn't get rid of the other one, the Class 2 rig, or did you? And I still got those parts those hubs that you had sent over. I know we were still talking about working on doing that one thing. I won't spoil it because I don't know if you want to spoil it, but we did talk about that. They're here. They've got your name on them. They're not going anywhere. All right, drive shafts are in. And you can see this is where it starts. This project starts to really show. So you can see the front drive shaft clears the motor all day long, no problem. You got plenty of clearance on your spur gear around that way. We're at full bump on the 80 mil shocks. The upper link, you can see the upper link clears the motor on a straight link. A curved link would even improve that clearance a little bit more, but even the straight link clears the side of the can. If you went to a bigger pinion, it might get close. You might have to run a curved link if you go, to a pinion that's, a good bit bigger in the can, because the can does move at a slight angle out towards that upper link. But I mean, I think it would still be fine even going up to like a 14, 15, 16 tooth pinion. I don't think that that's going to get into that link. So that all works well. And you can see, I mean, this chassis when it's at full bump, I mean, the links are almost completely flat with the skid. And with how high the drive shafts are, you could easily go to a high clearance lower links in the rear and get a lot more breakover clearance on stuff. I'm not sure I don't think I would recommend doing a high clearance link in the front. The clearance just isn't there between the lower link and the drive shaft and the lower link and the upper link on the other side. I don't recommend high clearance for the front. They're, but in the rear, you got room for days to run high clearance links. All right, let's throw some wheels and tires on this, and then we can slap a body on it so you can see how this sits. I need some wheel nuts. Oh, you parted out the Class 3. Okay. You aren't going to be using those hubs? That's kind of a shame. And I need to get some new wheel nuts. I think I only have used ones. Well, it sounds like Kenneth, it sounds like we need to get you started on a proper Class 1 build. So the wheels that are going onto this chassis are the breast cancer awareness wheels, the BCA wheels by Rusty Ampmere. I think that's how you say his last name. Rusty's Customs, and they not only are they pink, but they've got a nice little extra touch of detail on them for the BCA reuse. See if I can get it to where it's visible on the camera. So you can see that these, yeah, there you go. You can see it right there. There's the breast cancer ribbon, and that's actually Cerakoted into the wheel design. That's not a little decal on there. It's Cerakoted work. They're fantastic. The wheels are fantastically clean. Great look. They did come with a different beadlock ring that was done in a lighter pink color, but the wife decided she wanted black beadlock rings. I had these ones kicking around and put them on there, but they've got some scratches in them, so I actually have replacements coming that are scratch free, so that the first time she actually goes out with this truck, it looks all blingy blingy until she bashes it into something and scratches them up. You know how it goes. But we'll see. Who knows? She may decide that she doesn't like driving this truck, and it just becomes a shelf queen show off piece for the Spartan lineup, because it's got a lot of nice stuff in it, and it'll have more nice stuff by the time it's done. Are these? Yep. All right. We are so close to being at a good point for this video. I am running a 125 hub on these wheels in hopes that paired with these wheels, that is a low enough profile hub to get damn close to the C1 legal width as far as tire coverage by the fenders without having to do too much fender flaring on the body. This will be getting a two-door Mojave body in all colors, of course, pink. It's actually that one right there. That body will be going to this truck. I had a feeling that was going to happen. The 125 hubs, though, have a thin enough flange that you run out of threads on the axle output, and you can't tighten them down all the way without a washer. And I don't know if I have washers handy. If I do, I don't know where they are. So I'm gonna ignore the fact that the wheel wobbles a little bit because that's just the way it's gonna be for the moment. But my fix for that is to use an M4 washer behind the wheel nut. And that's what I do on my truck right there. And it works perfectly to run the real low profile hub and not run out of threads. There's that. And the body that I have available to drop on here so we can see the ride height is the good old red ship box. And we'll throw a couple of screws in to hold the body in place. There they go. Here are the holes. There's one. Don't even worry about putting them all the way in because it won't go anywhere. And so the skids that I did up for these are just a little bit wider than the unflexed natural shape of the body. So when you drop it on there, you actually have to, open the bottom, stretch the body open just a little bit. Not much, not enough to create any issues with the plastic or fatiguing it, but just enough that you have a little bit of pressure. So if you're one of those people who likes running the grub screw setup, that should work just fine with this. I haven't tried it on the comp chassis because if you body pops off in a comp, that's just sucks. You're basically giving away a shit ton of points to put your body back on because you wanted to be lazy and use grub screws instead of bolts. But once the bumpers are on, there's where this, let's see if we can, I'm going to adjust the camera down a little bit so you can see how this sits right here. And we going down, down, down. There it is. All right. So there's where this sits. There's where our wheelbase ended up with the body. You see the chassis all tucks nice and flat underneath. We might need to do a little bit of shock adjustment so that our travel is appropriate because it looks like the axle actually, our up travel we got a little too much up travel right now. The axle needs to start a little lower. In the rear, the front actually is pretty close to where it needs to be. But yeah, so there's the lighting right there sucks. Man, I will work on the lights, guys. I apologize. I should have tested that out more. But so there it is with the body on it. You can see the reliefs in the bed are fairly minor. These ones are a little bit oversized because this was the first bed that was cut for testing with the original prototype chassis. But we'll go ahead and we'll pop this body back off and we will grab the 3-gear version chassis, which is already fully assembled. You don't have to watch me build another one. And I will grab the prototype so you can see how one that's got all the electronics going in it. And we'll bring this one back up a little bit. And we'll switch it to the overhead. The 125 hubs, they're okay. Guys, don't hate me. I know it's kind of a blasphemous thing to do, but the 125 hubs are actually off of Amazon. I know, but they're the narrowest hubs I have been able to find anywhere. So the wrong bin. And that one. Yeah. At least I'm fairly certain they're like a 125 width. They're pretty narrow. Nope, those aren't them. I don't think I don't have any more in the box. All the standard ones, so I've used all the narrow ones that I have. I'll send you a link though, Mickey, so you can check it out. They work with the VP wheels. I'm not ashamed to say that I would much rather run. I'd like to put the VP hubs on there, but when I can find the stuff that makes it fit the way I need it to fit, because this was actually, I won't go through the hassle of bolting it back on, but this body does not have the fenders flared at all. There's no flaring on these fenders, and I've damn near, it's damn near got 50% tire coverage. Let me, the lighting shit on that side. There we go. So the tire coverage is, that is damn near 50% in the front. Close enough that, a SORCCA tech would have to be really picky to say that that was a not 50%. And if you cheated the foam a little bit before tech and pushed the foam in so the tire leans in, it definitely gets the 50% coverage in the front with these hubs. And in the rear, same thing. If you get the tire in and cheat the foam a little bit, that's well over the 50% coverage on the rear. So, and then you don't have to do any body flaring, and that's kind of nice. But, okay, so there's the forward motor mount version. Now, if I step over here, we have the Axial 3-gear version. This one is, let me get some shit out of the way. We have room to show this stuff off. All right. Get out of my way, tool. We're done with you. Screws. All right. So the Axial 3-gear variant. It's basically the initial chassis setup and build is almost identical. However, it uses a different skid. In theory, the links are interchangeable. However, these two trucks are set up with using different links holes on the chassis because I was playing with different geometry setups to see what I like. The Creeper T version has the rear upper links up high and almost parallel with the lower links, whereas the 3-gear version has the links, I'm showing the wrong camera. The rear upper links are set in a low position, and so it's going to give a little bit different behavior. But that's one of those things that you set up a few times. This truck's got it's got Axial, the shocks that came with the Axial 10.3 straight axle kit, which are like a 90-95 mil shock. It's a little long for this. There's a little too much droop, which could be fixed with a spacer inside underneath the piston. Probably what I will do. And then it's got a spring cup conversion to run mini T-springs on those. And they've got a great feel to them. I actually think that those are going to be a pretty good shock once I take some of the travel out of them. The front end, actual front and rear on this is running SSD housed AR44s. It's got a center diff on the front, and you can see the all straight links. Again, this has got 3D printed links on it right now because that's what I use to do all my mock-up work before I build actual aluminum links. But the clearances are great with all straight links, no needing any curved stuff. This has a servo in it. You can see the steering's there, and there's clearance for days on the chassis, wrong way, on the chassis at full bump. There's no issue with links hitting the chassis. You could even run a low pro. You could run the servo body set up a little bit higher. This setup does have the option to run a tray right here where the FMM, where the forward motor mount actually goes in. There's a tray that you can put in there in place to either put electronics on, or it's got some notches in it for running a Velcro strap. It's got the Spartan logo added on there. The battery that's sitting right here is a 654S. So I mean that's your comp battery right there. Basically, it's a complete setup as well in similar fashion, but very different configuration of the Spartan chassis. And the parts that it's built with are, no different. It's the exact same set of parts that went into both of these trucks. The difference is in the printed parts that you use with them, and you don't use the FMM plate setup on the 3-gear version. 3-gear is in reverse of how it is in most of your RTR type stuff that you see with 3 gears. It's usually the spur gear to the front and the motor towards the rear. I did it this way because this is how it fits properly in the chassis. It has nothing to do with wanting to flip it for any specific reason other than fitting the motor can in here, needed it to be with the motor forward, which is actually, it's a little bit better for weight distribution to have the weight of the motor towards the front. The clearance on the drive shafts is fine. I mean, ignore the fact that this has got ugly mock-up drive shafts that have seen some serious life on them. And you can see the front shaft on this is an older MIP CVD drive shaft. Probably still strong as snot, but looks grimy. And the rear drive shaft is some junky Amazon thing that's long that allowed me to have a mock-up drive shaft because I didn't have another one of the Incision long drive shafts to put in the back. The last piece I will note that's on this one that I did to basically to show the option of being able to do it is this has got a sheet metal slider on it that is bent 90 degrees down and bolts to the same screws that bolt the skid plate in. And then I took and 3D printed a backer piece that goes under the outside bend that gives you, it just screws in so it's easy to replace that backer. And then it gives you body mount holes in the side that don't require any nuts on the back that match the same body mount holes that are on the 3D printed skids. I had those done out of stainless and then threw them in my little vise and beat the shit out of them with a hammer to get the bends nice and tight. I don't know if there's enough interest. I can look into possibly selling the flat patterns of the sliders, but until I have appropriate tooling to put nice clean bends, I mean, you can't really tell on the video, I don't think, but oh yeah, you can see it right there. You can see how beat to snot this is, and until I can do a nice clean bend on something, there's no way I'm gonna sell something that looks like that. That's just tacky. But there's a possibility I'd be willing to sell the flat patterns, and you bend them yourself at home, and it would come with or you pull up the instruction sheet that'll tell you exactly what the measurement is to score it as far as lining it up in a vise and bending it. Because that's all I did is I took a measurement out of my CAD software that tells me where the bend line needs to be. I set that in my calipers and just put a real light score line across the sheet metal, lined that up with my vise, and went to town on it, and it worked out pretty good. But it's not good enough as being a part that's worthy of selling, not at this point. But yeah, so there's your Axial 3-gear version right there. And then, I'll show you the prototype just so you can see what it looks like with all the electronics and with an FMM. But we won't spend much time on this truck as far as what the differences are with it. We'll move the 3-gear over to that side. Just because the prototype chassis that I'm about to show you it'll never be available again for purchase outside of potentially replacing parts for guys that already have a prototype chassis if they break something. But I won't ever sell the prototype chassis. There's some inherent problematic areas with the prototype chassis that just had to be fixed, which is why you do prototypes. And those issues were resolved going forward into the production model, and that's what you saw in both of those trucks, minus that one thing I talked about at the beginning of the video with the rear shock hoops, which has been resolved in all the chassis that will actually be sold. Pop that off. Get rid of the body. Go fully loaded with electronics and with bumpers. This is what the what it basically looks like. Get rid of the 3 gear. You need to go this way. So on the slider, this truck's got, a big old 1300 milliamp 3S battery on the slider. There's plenty of room to the side of the chassis that it'll tuck in. The amount of space available on the slider here is similar on this slider. There is a little block underneath to raise the battery up a little bit so it gives a nice flat surface. Might be something you want to do there on these sliders. It's up to you as far as what you want to run. And also what type of battery. If you run something like these little 654S batteries as your comp batteries, those tuck into those little sliders, pretty decently on the side. A little piece of Velcro in there, and that's not going to go anywhere. And then the Holmes Hobby ESC, what is that? That's the BL something rather. I can't remember. It's the Holmes Hobby Brush ESC. So that's what's in there. This has got a Crawlmaster Pro 13 turn, which works fantastic. The same FMM setup that's in this one, except it's running a slipper. And you can see that the spacer here, I was talking about earlier on when we built the FMM, is a different thickness than the spacer in this one. And that's because the length of the shaft with the slipper setup was longer than the length of the shaft with the incision setup. And the slipper itself is actually closer to the FMM plate than the slipper eliminator is. That's where the length difference is. It has to do with that eliminator plate that's in there. So that's where you may have to fiddle around with different thicknesses of a spacer right here based on what your build is. The intermediate shaft in this one is the MIP, or not the MIP, the super shafty top shaft. This has got the SSD, or not SSD, the incision drive shafts in it. AGFRC 32 kilograms, like 400 ounce inch, 350, 400 ounce inch. It's a decent servo. It's not a kick-ass into the world servo by any means, but it's a decent servo for a decent price. It's waterproof. I like them, but I also not one of those people who's chasing a servo that moves the earth instead of turns the wheels. Creeper T F9 Pro setup. This has TRX4 takeoff shocks with mini spring cup mod for mini Losi mini T springs. Some homemade welded bumpers by Neil. He's one of the guys that's in this chat, or was on the video at some point earlier. And that's basically the rundown on this truck. And this gives you an idea, all the electronics thrown into the chassis, basically, the same amount of chassis space is available. The electronics all do fit without too much of a challenge. And this truck, the body for this truck runs a full interior. So, I run a full interior, head to toe driver. You can't see it because of the lighting sucks right here. Whatever. You can kind of see it in that camera. There we go. Yeah, you can see there's bench seat. There's some shit in there, some shifters, full floor, driver's head to toe. And that all everything here fits underneath that full interior. So it's all there. But so yeah, there you have it. That is the Spartan chassis. They are officially available. Not the beat up prototype. That's not available. Never will be. But the all new full release design chassis that you see here is available. It'll be $150 plus shipping. Shipping in the United States, I already looked into it. It's $15 to get it shipped, and basically it'll be another piece of cardboard like such, and that'll be all sealed up with tape and your shipping information. But that's what you get right there. And they're available for purchase. I have them ready to go. I don't have a whole lot of them. It doesn't take me a long time to get more of them, to get replacement orders in. So if I don't have them, I can get them within a pretty short period of time. But yeah. Thanks everybody for dropping in. Let's see if there's any comments I need to pick up on. Yep, I covered the hubs. Mickey, I'll get you a link on the ones that I got, so you can check those out. You're gonna send me your SX102 to convert it to a Spartan? Yeah, I mean, you can do that if you pay for the ride. I'll do the work. That's fine. Lance, I can't remember. I didn't see when your last comment came up about the body popping off. So I don't know what I was talking about when that came up, but I'm assuming it had something to do with the skids or grub screws, that whole setup. I think the only reason I went to actual screws with heads was grub screw versus regular screw. The only reason I went to the screws versus the head is because I wanted to absolutely have no issue whatsoever, even if I sent it tumbling, because I wanted to do some torture testing. I didn't want to be afraid to send it out when I went to Crawlapalooza with it the very first time, and then I just kept putting the same screws back in. But I have run grub screws on the Blazer that you can't see because it's under the Crawlapalooza towel, and the Toyota that's above it, which that body doesn't actually go to that chassis. Well, it will eventually, but both of those are on grub screws, but neither of those are comp trucks either. So it was what it was. I'm sure grub screws would work fine, especially if you run the winch cable over the top into an elastic band, like a lot of the comp guys do, so that you don't have to spool it all the way in and out every time. Then you also have that holding the body on. So I have no doubt that they should work fine on grub screws. And the option's there either way, regardless of whether you use the 3D printed skid or do something like I did with my sheet metal skids on that other truck. Yeah, I think this is going to be a good. Oh man, I think maybe it's not the springs are too stiff. I think maybe I did too heavy of an oil in these shocks, because the rebound is super slow. But it might make it work really good. Feels decent. All right, I think that about covers it. I don't know what else to get into tonight. I'm not gonna mess with doing the servo. Instead, I showed you that it all works. It's up in this chassis. There's what your servo geometry looks like. Nothing too fancy about it. Steering servo drops in on one side. Actually, the reason to grab the prototype truck again, a servo winch, which I have a micro in this one, but a servo winch drops right in on the other side. No big deal. Micro winch, if you do want one of those, depending on what you do with your front bumper, I have a mount that you can take the micro winch and turn it on its side and have the spool up here in the middle. So that's an option too. I just need to redo the front bumper to work with that orientation. But yeah, thank you everybody for tuning in. Be sure to hit that like button for me or hit the dislike. Let me know. If you like the video, share it, get it out there. Let's get the Spartan well known. I know I highly doubt anyone will build one and get it to nationals this year, but we'll hopefully one of them can make it out to nationals next year, and everybody want to know what the heck it is. So in the meantime, everybody have a great evening. Thanks for hanging in there for me for, oh man, how long were we on here? Almost 3.5 hours. Holy cow. You guys rock for hanging out. Appreciate it. And we will see you next time. And boom.